My husband's 28-year-old secret son showed up after 30 years of being child-free. After 30 years of being child-free, my husband's 28-year-old illegitimate son showed up at our door. This was the second year since illegitimate children gained inheritance rights. His intentions were obvious. When I asked my husband what he thought, his eyes darted away nervously. He mumbled about us getting older and needing someone to care for us, about blood being blood. When I stayed silent, he closed his eyes and played his trump card. If you have any children out there, you can bring them home too. They can all inherit our estate. After 30 years together, with us never being apart for more than a year, he was certain I couldn't possibly have any secret children. But if he wanted to play that game, I had no reason to feel guilty. Secret children? He really thought I didn't have any? Not only did I have them, I had more than he did. Chapter 1. When the young man said he'd come to find his biological father, my brain short-circuited before I managed to tell him, "You've got the wrong house." My husband and I had agreed to be child-free before marriage. How could there be a child? The young man maintained his polite smile, his gaze sliding past me to focus on someone behind me. His voice filled with excitement. "Uncle Robert." "No, Dad." "Dad?" I turned stiffly, following his line of sight to see my husband Robert standing in the living room, watching us. His face showed a complex mix of emotions, guilt evident in his features. His eyes darted everywhere except to mine. A bone-deep chill spread through my body. What else was there to understand? The three of us sat in the living room. Robert and the young man exchanged countless meaningful glances, silently communicating. They were clearly familiar with each other, had probably met many times in private. I was the stranger here. I remained silent. After 30 years of marriage, my husband who'd proposed being child-free before our wedding had a 28-year-old illegitimate son. I didn't know what expression or emotion I should have. We were both nearly 60, recently retired, holding the savings we'd worked our entire lives to accumulate. And this was the second year illegitimate children had legal inheritance rights. The young man's intentions in showing up now were crystal clear. Chapter 2. With the truth out, Robert could only apologize and explain repeatedly. His reasons were pathetic, summed up in one phrase: a drunken mistake from his youth. What a joke. Setting aside that Robert was famously able to hold his liquor when young, even if he was drunk, could he really perform? After 30-plus years together. This man with more gray hair than black suddenly felt like a stranger. I looked at them and asked my first question since Dylan had entered: "Why didn't your mother come?" Dylan's mouth twitched, his look suggesting he'd expected this question. "Mrs. Catherine, my mother's very busy. She's traveling with friends right now, doesn't have time to come." I narrowed my eyes, carefully studying this young man who bore a 5-point resemblance to Robert. I'd lived 20-plus years longer than him. I wasn't deaf to the barbs in his words. He held his chin slightly raised, his attitude unconsciously arrogant. Just an illegitimate son? Did he think he had superiority over me? I laughed coldly. "So your mother raised you all these years without finding you a father, and now she's sending you to find one because she can't afford you anymore?" Dylan's face darkened. Before he could speak, Robert barked, "Catherine." I looked at him coldly. He still couldn't meet my eyes, just mumbled that even if I was angry, I shouldn't take it out on the child. The child was innocent, knew nothing. Innocent? Of course not. As an illegitimate child, his very existence was the original sin. Dylan didn't stay long. He'd come to deliver one message: he had a girlfriend and wanted to marry, but his current apartment was too small for marriage. He wanted to move in with us. After all, Robert and I lived in a 3,200-square-foot penthouse. What delusions. I hadn't worked my ass off for half my life to make wedding clothes for others. I immediately refused, but Robert kept his head down, saying nothing. As Dylan left, he gave me a mocking smile. Robert had already done a paternity test with him. Even as an illegitimate child, his inheritance rights were set in stone. I could stop him temporarily, but not forever. Chapter 3. After Dylan left, Robert and I sat in the living room in silence. The deed was done. Nothing said now would matter. After weighing the pros and cons repeatedly, I suppressed my rage and asked Robert, "What's your plan?" Robert hemmed and hawed before saying, "Catherine, we're getting older, not as strong as before. Having someone to look after us." I cut him off. "Stop the bullshit. I will never accept him. The child was his, not mine. Have him take care of us? Was I looking to die faster?" Dylan's eyes held clear hostility toward me. I wasn't blind. I'd considered divorce, but that meant Robert would get half our marital assets. These assets took us most of our lives to accumulate. Even half I didn't want Dylan to benefit. Robert's expression shifted several times before he suppressed his temper. He said more, all variations of how this had happened. Dylan was his bloodline, he couldn't not acknowledge him. As if the Roberts had a throne to inherit. What singular bloodline bullshit. Seeing my continued coldness, Robert finally gritted his teeth and played his ace. "Catherine, if you have children out there too, bring them home. They can inherit our estate along with Dylan." He dared say this because we'd been together 30 years, never apart for more than a year. He was certain I couldn't have secret children. Plus I was 57, past childbearing age. They'd calculated well, waiting until now when I had no chance to change my mind about children. But secret children, who could predict such things? Seeing my expression, Robert softened his tone. Catherine, I admit I made a small mistake when young and wronged you. But we've weathered 30 years together. How many more years do we have? At our age, having children is impossible. Dylan has my blood, his character can't be bad. Perhaps he didn't realize his face showed smug satisfaction. Being child-free was his idea. He'd said he disliked children, even had a physical aversion to them. I'd agreed, since I didn't like children either. We'd reached our child-free consensus. Now he'd stabbed me in the back, then turned to mock me. Your fault for being naive, not knowing to protect yourself. Chapter 4. 3 days. Robert only acted contrite for 3 days. After that, he brazenly contacted Dylan in front of me. WeChat voice calls, video calls, phone calls. Our once quiet living room now filled with laughter. These past 2 days, Robert even suggested changing Dylan's last name to Roberts. I ignored him, coldly watching his smug satisfaction. Scumbags excel at disguise with extremely long latency periods, but 30 years of pretense like Robert's was rare. I was nearly 60. At this age, my drive to struggle had faded. I lacked the courage to start over. Plus, Robert and I had already liquidated most of our assets from our younger years. Making him lose everything wouldn't be simple. My attitude made Robert think Dylan's acknowledgement was basically settled. After all, Dylan being his biological son was indisputable. Even the law recognized it. Tired of seeing Robert's face, I decided to go away with my friend Helen for a few days. Robert thoughtfully packed my luggage, cheerfully reminding me as I left, Catherine, at our age, many things can't be changed. Best to just accept it. Helen took my luggage from him, smiling even more cheerfully. Robert, it's because of your attitude that Catherine and I can travel without worries. Robert missed Helen's subtext, thinking I hadn't told Helen about his illegitimate son. He thought she was praising him. The car door closed. Robert's figure shrank in the rearview mirror. I turned to Helen. Are the kids back? Helen nodded. Got back last night. They're waiting at home. I said nothing more, wearily massaging my temples. My left hand was grasped. Looking down, I saw Helen was only a year younger than me, but the wrinkles on her hand matched mine. I sighed silently, gently squeezing back. Chapter 5. I was gone 5 days, cutting off all contact with Robert. When I returned home and opened the door, a mixed-breed dog rushed out first. The dog barked at me from inside my own home. A strange woman's voice called out, Buttercup, what's wrong? Is someone here? The woman walking to the door swallowed her words upon seeing me. Clearly she recognized me. While in this home, she was the guest. An unwelcome one at that. The woman looked about my age, wearing a pale pink dress with permed waves, thick makeup, deep laugh lines. She looked expensively tacky. Our eyes met. My expression was hostile. Though I'd guessed her identity, I still asked accusingly, who are you? Why are you in my home? Panic flashed across the woman's face before she steadied herself, giving me an unfriendly smile. You must be Catherine? I'm Lisa. Lisa, Dylan. More voices came from inside. Mom, who's here? Dylan and Robert appeared behind Lisa. Perfect. The whole family was here. Robert was still guilty, stammering about why I hadn't said I was coming back early. I sneered. If I'd warned you, would I have seen this show? Entering the living room, I discovered it wasn't a family of 3 but 4. Dylan's girlfriend lay on the couch playing with her phone, feet propped on the coffee table. Hearing someone arrive, she glanced up briefly before returning to her phone. Robert actually dared bring his old flame and illegitimate son home. This was too much. Chapter 6. I slammed my luggage on the table. The girl on the couch pulled her feet down and glared at me. Dylan the lapdog immediately started yelling, can't you be more careful? I didn't even look at him. This is my home. I'll do what I want. What's it to you, outsider? This is my dad's home too, Dylan sneered, chin raised, looking down his nose at me. With inexplicable superiority, Mrs. Catherine, at your age you need someone to rely on. I suggest you be nicer to me. I looked at him, memorizing his arrogant expression. Lisa stood beside Robert, lips pursed in a smile. Like an old white lotus. I ignored them, gesturing to Robert with my chin, keeping my tone calm. Robert, sit down. Let's talk. Robert instinctively looked at Lisa and Dylan. Lisa seemed to snort, not avoiding the situation, sitting directly across from me. Dylan sat beside her, looking at me with hostility. They couldn't grasp their position. Of course, Robert had allowed this. Robert looked between them and me, finally. Sitting on Lisa's other side. They flanked Lisa protectively, as if I was some villain who'd bully her. I cut to the chase. Robert, you should know exactly how much we've saved over the years. At these words, everyone looked at Robert. Even the girl gaming on the couch turned her volume to minimum, secretly listening. The living room fell into eerie silence. Robert looked at me for a long time before nodding. I know. Our savings were in one bank account with a 6-digit PIN. I only knew the first 3 digits, Robert knew the last 3. When young, Robert and I were big spenders, keeping separate finances. Then Robert got seriously ill. Our combined savings couldn't cover the surgery. That's when we learned money's importance and started saving together. To prevent either of us from reverting to old spending habits, we devised this system. In front of everyone, I pulled out the bank card and placed it on the table. There's 2.24 million. Hearing this amount, everyone except the girl on the couch showed no surprise. Clearly Robert had already told them. Robert rubbed his hands, laughing awkwardly. Catherine, I've calculated Dylan's wedding expenses. 1 million should cover it. Lisa interrupted. Robert, you don't understand current prices. For a proper wedding with banquet, dowry, jewelry, photos, it won't be enough. The girl who'd been lying down now sat properly, feet on the floor, nodding along. She's right. My friend got married last year and her fiancé gave 660,000. I'm no worse than her, right? Dylan moved over, fondly patting her head. Of course not. You won't get less than her, right Dad? The ball was back in Robert's court. He didn't answer, sneaking a glance at me. Catherine, marriage is once in a lifetime. Maybe we could. Let me finish. I unlocked my phone, opening the calculator. The house has 5 years left on the mortgage, 8,000 monthly. 2. Pay it off requires 500,000. Our 3,200 square foot place was bought early when prices were just over 10,000 per square foot. We'd paid 15 years of a 20-year mortgage. We hadn't paid early because most interest was already paid. With our current savings, 5 more years wasn't much pressure. Before Robert could speak, Lisa frowned. That leaves just over $1 million. Barely enough for Dylan's wedding. Dylan chimed in. Dad, the mortgage must be paid first. Mine and Kiki's salaries barely cover monthly expenses, nothing else. I looked up from my phone screen at their greedy faces and smiled slowly. What are you thinking? What makes you think you'd get any of that million plus? Their faces immediately darkened. Robert's frown could have crushed flies. Catherine, didn't you accept this? Why are you saying this? I've told you, Dylan is my only child. I raised my hand to stop him. You have one child, that's your business. This is our joint property. Of course our children should split it equally. Before Robert could understand, I made a call. Bring the kids in. Chapter 7. Helen soon brought 3 children to sit beside me. My side went from solitary to crowded, outnumbering Robert's side by 1. By age, my children were all younger than Dylan. The eldest daughter was 19, a college freshman. The twins were 16, high school sophomores. Being Helen's children, Robert knew them. He knew they'd called me godmother since childhood, always calling me mom. So seeing them, Robert wasn't just unworried but visibly relieved. He even patted Lisa's hand reassuringly. Looking at me again, his expression showed exasperation. Catherine, you should know better than me. Privately acknowledged godchildren have no inheritance rights without a will. Dylan and Kiki froze, then laughed loudly. Godchildren? Are you kidding, lady? These days, random godchildren can inherit? What about real children then? Their laughter died when Helen produced 3 paternity reports. Robert's hands shook so badly he could barely hold the thin papers. After 30 years together, he knew me. I wouldn't do something without certainty, wouldn't bring it up publicly. He hadn't believed it because he knew my character. In 30 years of marriage, he thought I wouldn't betray him, had no time to betray him. 3 paternity reports proved the 3 children were my blood. They examined the reports repeatedly, suspecting forgery. Robert's face was ashen, mumbling repeatedly, impossible, this is impossible. Yes, in 30 years of marriage, I'd often traveled for work when young, later for pleasure, but we'd never been apart more than a year, at most 8 or 9 months. In 8 or 9 months, I couldn't have had a child without anyone knowing. So only one possibility remained: I didn't give birth to the children. But why would medical tests show parent-child relationships? With Robert's brain, he'd never figure it out. Since illegitimate children had inheritance rights, both parties' illegitimate children should have them. I continued calculating. After paying off the mortgage, 1.74 million remains. I'll keep 200,000 for retirement. Do you need retirement money? I asked Robert. Robert's lips moved several times before squeezing out yes. 1.74 million minus 400,000 leaves 1.34 million. Split that among these 4 children. Why? No way. How's that? Enough for a wedding? 3 voices erupted from Robert's side. Lisa reacted first, glaring at me. Who knows if your paternity reports are fake? You say they're your children and they are? Then are yours real? I asked calmly. Lisa's face stiffened momentarily before she covered it, voice rising. Whether Dylan is biological, Robert knows best. Doesn't Robert know if you were pregnant? Since no one trusts anyone, Helen, silent since bringing the children, suggested, let's all get authoritative paternity tests together. Get a lawyer to prevent fraud. What do you think? Robert suddenly started coughing violently, hunched on the ground, shaking as if coughing up his lungs. Dylan tried to help him but Lisa held him back. When Robert stood again, all his recent smugness and arrogance were gone. He looked at me, eyes red perhaps from coughing. His words from days ago: Catherine, if you have children outside, bring them home too. They can inherit with Dylan still echoed. Now I'd brought children home as requested. He didn't look happy. See, when the same fire burns others, he thinks they're warm. Only when it burns him does he know how much it hurts. Chapter 8. The paternity tests never happened. I had no objections, but Robert refused, Lisa refused, Dylan refused. They wouldn't acknowledge my reports were real. Fine, I wouldn't acknowledge theirs either. We could wait it out. The one desperate to marry wasn't my child anyway. Plus my children weren't short of money. Helen's company earned enough to support them for generations. Since it was summer break and Dylan was staying here, I had Helen move in with the kids too. The house had plenty of rooms, full occupancy made it lively. The rooms had good soundproofing. Lisa and Dylan had been in Robert's room for hours, surely discussing next steps. I watched on the surveillance cameras. The house originally had no cameras. The day after Dylan showed up, when Robert and I went out together, I had Helen install pinhole cameras in every room. Perfect timing to use them now. They clearly hadn't expected me to have children. Losing their composure, they paced back and forth before Robert. Robert sat slumped in a chair, looking utterly defeated. His recent pride was gone. In this moment, he seemed to have aged tremendously. Lisa could no longer maintain her dignity, complaining constantly about Robert not protecting against me, about Robert's incompetence, unable to provide even his son's wedding money. Compared to Robert, she was truly capable. When young, she'd firmly grasped both her husband and Robert, two cousins. Hearts. After her husband died, she'd made Robert a true cuckold. Dylan and Kiki kept muttering, finally reaching a solution: have Robert divorce me. That way, marital assets would be split evenly, not just a quarter like my calculation. Youth had its advantages. They knew to research online and understood law. It was indeed a good solution, but who said I'd agree to divorce just because Robert asked? Their urgent need for marriage money had nothing to do with me. Joint marital property was in my hands, the bank card under my name. Push me too far and I'd go change the password, buy useless non-returnable items, spend it all. What could they do? Chapter 9. That night at 9, Robert said he wanted to talk properly. I agreed. We sat on the balcony rockers, watching the lonely moon and stars. The night-blooming jasmine we'd planted months ago had bloomed, its fragrance filling the air as it awakened from slumber. Perhaps night makes people vulnerable. Robert's voice held tears. Catherine, how did we reach this point in just a few days? Just a few days? He mentioned nothing of 30 years of betrayal, blaming everything on a few days of sudden change. What nerve? I stayed silent, closing my eyes to feel the evening breeze. Robert had opened the floodgates, rambling about our 30 years until I grew drowsy. Only then did he get to the point, roundaboutly asking about Helen, the children, and me. At this point, with faces torn, telling him about Helen and me didn't matter. Helen and I grew up in the same small town. Similar ages, similarly poor families. I had an alcoholic father, she had a gambling addict. I grew up with my father's drunken abuse of our family. Helen was different. She grew up with debt collectors' threats and curses. Perhaps because we both had broken homes, Helen and I resonated. We'd been close since childhood, sharing everything. Maybe from seeing too much of men's behavior in our town, I grew to hate all men, including my alcoholic father who beat my mother and me. Helen felt even stronger than I did. At 15 or 16, we wondered if our fate would mirror our mothers marrying alcoholics or gambling addicts. I couldn't imagine it. Neither could Helen. She said her debt-dodging father would be better off dead. At 17, I finished sophomore year when my mother stopped my education. She said letting me finish high school was generous enough. Girls shouldn't be too educated, their hearts would grow wild. Helen had it worse. She only completed mandatory education before her family couldn't afford more. That mountain of debt waited for her to shoulder. That year, Helen and I found garment factory work in the county. We depended on each other as if we only had each other in the world. Leaving our families, we felt reborn. But good times didn't last. At 20, our mothers demanded we marry through arranged matches. Marriage, living their predictable lives. I refused. So did Helen. That day Helen held me crying for hours. She said she liked me, only wanted to be with me. I liked Helen too. We didn't want marriage. We just wanted to live simply together. I didn't understand why mutual affection wasn't allowed. Learning my thoughts, my mother's face went red with rage. She screamed at me, "You're both women. Women together violates ethics and morality." She said I'd destroyed the reputation she'd maintained half her life. But what reputation did she have? Which month wasn't she beaten black and blue by my drunk father? Helen's mother was the same. This woman who'd cowered behind Helen when debt collectors came suddenly grew bold with her daughter. She locked Helen at home, saying things even worse than my mother. She demanded to know why Helen was a pervert. She grabbed Helen's hair, slamming her head against the wall, demanding why she didn't just die. During those difficult times, Helen and I considered dying together more than once. But why should we? Who we liked, what we liked, we hadn't stolen or broken laws. What was wrong with that? Why did society view us through colored glasses? Would marrying men guarantee good outcomes? Chapter 10. Silence fell again. Cricket chirps rose. Robert's low voice was half covered by crickets, but I understood his meaning. He asked why I married him if I didn't want marriage. Simple me, mother threatened suicide, plus Helen was forcibly married off by her family. Blind marriage. Helen's parents took a large dowry. Helen didn't even know where the family lived. Or what they looked like before marrying. After Helen married, my mother said I embarrassed her, that without marriage she'd never hold her head up among relatives and friends. Eventually she threatened suicide. I didn't understand what my marriage had to do with her holding her head up, but she'd birthed and raised me. With her threatening death, I couldn't let her actually die. I was young then, easily bound by familial moral shackles. I obediently met every match my mother arranged. Until meeting Robert. I was 24, he was 26. Both pressured by family, we had no time to know each other. I'd planned to refuse like all the others. I had conscience I wouldn't waste the time of men genuinely wanting families. But during our date, Robert proposed something that moved me. He wanted to be child-free. For me, it was perfect timing. Robert and I quickly became official. But after marriage, facing a man daily still oppressed me enough to want divorce, even death. Plus Robert excelled at silent treatment. He'd go 10 days to 2 weeks without speaking over trivial matters. 6 months in, when I finally couldn't suppress the urge to divorce, my marriage took a fatal turn. I discovered Robert was frequently contacting a woman outside. That woman was married nominally his sister-in-law. That's when I finally contacted Helen after much difficulty. Helen's husband did everything: drinking, gambling, prostitutes. Domestic violence was routine. When Helen was 4 months pregnant, he came home drunk again, nearly beating Helen to death and causing her miscarriage. Unable to endure the beatings, Helen ran home several times. Each time her family notified her husband to collect her. Helen was in complete despair then. When I found her, seeing her destroyed by marriage, we held each other and wept. "Let's die together," Helen said. "Catherine, this world has no place for us." That night Helen and I walked hand in hand into the deep river. When freezing water reached our waists, I felt Helen's hand trembling violently. We feared the unknown. Death. When water reached our chests, I heard Helen's suppressed sobs. She was afraid. So was I. Given the choice, no one wants to die. As water covered our heads, about to consume our last breath, I pulled the unconscious Helen to shore. "We shouldn't be the ones dying," I told Helen. "Living is already hard enough. We've been decent, never harming anyone. We must live." Helen stared at me, crying silently. What should die were those futile, rigid thoughts. Whatever relationship Helen and I had, we were each other's support to keep living. Those people never helped when we were struggling. When we supported each other crawling from the mud, they wanted to stomp us down? No such luck. Chapter 11. Robert asked, "If you wanted to be with Helen, why not divorce me? Your cousin died years ago. You could have been with your sister-in-law openly," I countered. "Why didn't you ever mention divorce?" Robert fell silent. He'd considered it but weighed the pros and cons. I closed my eyes, not looking at him. 2 divorced women together would invite gossip, but not a married woman. That era wasn't like now. Helen and I needed to work, to survive. I'd long known about Robert's illegitimate son, even before Robert himself. I wasn't stupid. A man planning child-free before marriage, of course I'd guard against him. But I never told Robert this. I only said, "You know what happened next." I never hid anything, never lied to you. This was true. I'd never hidden my feelings for Helen from Robert. After Helen left, her husband's family didn't give up searching. But I'd hidden her well. After a few years, they gave up. Robert knew Helen had come to me. He never asked questions. A man with a family outside craved more freedom. He preferred my attention on Helen. Years ago, I'd told him repeatedly, "I really like Helen." He'd always smiled indifferently, occasionally agreeing, "Helen's great. Having a close friend is good." I'd said what needed saying. I felt no guilt toward Robert. Robert covered his eyes with his arm, saying nothing. Sudden arguing from the living room broke the balcony's peace. Chapter 12. Lisa and Helen were fighting, grappling together, hair disheveled. The 3 kids were also tussling with Dylan, clearly having the upper hand. Robert stood helplessly. I protected Helen, pulling them apart only after ensuring Helen had slapped Lisa several times. The living room was chaos. Lisa crouched crying. Dylan glared viciously at my children, cursing, but one mouth couldn't outcurse 3. My kids weren't pushovers. Robert clutched his head, hunched over, visibly breaking down. This was just beginning and he was already collapsing. What about later? The fight ended inconclusively. Lisa vented all her anger on Robert. Helen and I discussed next steps in our room, deciding not 1 cent of mine and Robert's savings, including the house, would go to Lisa and Dylan. I knew without children, someone like Dylan would drain my life's work and never treat me well. That night Lisa and Dylan left. Dylan threw out threats about seeing how long I'd stay smug. I'd be smug for a long time. He was young. The next day after they left, I sent Helen and the kids home too. As expected, Robert quickly asked for divorce. After 30 years of marriage, he said we'd mutually betrayed each other, proposed splitting assets, selling the house quickly, dividing everything equally. Mutual betrayal? I disagreed. Without his cheating first, I'd have divorced rather than betray the marriage. We were different. So I refused. Robert panicked. Dylan's wedding was urgent, of course he was anxious. But I wasn't. I said, file for divorce then. Litigation takes time. As long as I insisted our relationship hadn't broken down, the first filing wouldn't grant divorce. Robert didn't understand, his questioning desperate. I remained calm. You hid your illegitimate son for 28 whole years. Why did Dylan only show up now? Watching Robert's shocked, swaying body, I continued. You really think I knew nothing, Robert? Dylan hadn't suddenly appeared. I was done wasting time with Robert at my age, so I doctored my annual physical results. I'd been diagnosed with heart disease. Robert didn't disappoint. The day Dylan showed up, he'd hidden my heart medication. I knew everything. So showing mercy to someone who wanted me dead would be cruelty to myself. Chapter 13. The fastest ways to squander wealth are gambling and investing. At my age, I didn't want to risk gambling addiction. That left investing. Robert didn't file for divorce, perhaps from guilt. He stopped coming home, openly living with Lisa and Dylan. Over the years, he surely had substantial private funds. Dylan, needing money, would accept him without hesitation. This worked perfectly for me. My investment journey went smoothly. The young wealth manager clearly looked inexperienced. Sure enough, after initial token gains, serious losses began snowballing. In just 2 or 3 months, savings and house were gone. When Robert found out, it was too late. Penniless, he could only rage impotently. Lisa and Dylan looked incredulous, calling me vicious. Me, vicious? If I hadn't known everything and prepared, I might not even have the chance to call them vicious today. Let's divorce, I told Robert. If you don't agree, I'll keep filing. I had time and energy to waste with him. Chapter 14. The divorce proceedings with Robert took over a year. Finally the court granted it. Much happened in that year. First, Lisa was scammed of all savings by an old man she'd been involved with. Then Kiki dumped Dylan when he developed a gambling addiction. Robert, at his age, was forced to find work just to pay Dylan's gambling debts. I didn't pay much attention, throwing myself into business and the children's education. Actually, Helen's and my early entrepreneurial attempts weren't smooth. First, we lacked startup capital. Second, with little education and limited knowledge, people rarely earn beyond their understanding. Our only advantage was diligence and persistence. Our success mainly came from catching the economic boom. Robert knew Helen was starting a business then. I'd suggested investing. He refused. This shallow man dismissed Helen's ventures, saying her products weren't special, couldn't possibly succeed. Later, seeing Helen's success, he shamelessly wanted to invest through our relationship for a share. Dream on. The small company Helen and I built always had Helen as sole owner. Nominally I worked at Helen's company, drawing $8,000 monthly salary. Helen lacked security, so I gave it to her. With sufficient assets, if she wanted to abandon me, she could any time. I'd have no complaints. Having faced life and death together, I trusted her as she trusted me. We'd seen through everything. After the company succeeded, Helen wanted a child. The child didn't need both our bloodlines. I didn't care about such things. But after several miscarriages, Helen's body never recovered. She developed ovulation disorders. So all 3 children carried both Helen's and my DNA. Helen said I was the light in her life. Wasn't she the same for me? Supporting each other, stumbling along, we could weather the long years. The end.